afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good to see some new faces. So we're at part of family systems, but we'll joining us for the first time. The first three parts. To begin with, we spoke about what is IFS, what is it. It's primarily a therapeutic tool. It's largely used in the realm of psychotherapy, and it was theorized by Richard Schwartz. Okay. So it's a blend of multiple things. It blends the sociographical thing of system thinking with psychology, and that's how internal family system process or as a tool was created. The premise IFS operates is that while all think themselves as one human being personality, within us there are parts, right? So there is a part that is a great artist, there is a part of us that's a good manager, there's a part of us that's a child to somebody, husband to parts of us. Some tagged certain roles we play in life, but some of them are internal parts that hold part of our lives first, some emotions as the case may be. And some of these parts may carry what is termed in IFS language, it is called as burdens. In regular language, what we mean is traumatic memories, unpleasant memories. Unpleasant memories, they tend to react to certain situations in a certain way. Okay. So for example, if as a child you probably went on stage the first time and you were able to give a speech, and for whatever reason you forgot or you failed, and you felt embarrassed about the situation, there's a part of you that child part of you who felt exposed in front of a stage that carries that burden of that embarrassment, that unpleasant memory, sometimes even that guilt. And therefore, anytime later in life, and this could even be 20, 30 years later, if you had to be called up to make a presentation or a speech, the part reacts and it gets, because it has a very distant memory, conscious memory, there's a distant memory. So what happens in the process is that the part then to the role of what is called an exile. So there are three different parts that we spoke about. There is an exile. Exiles are part of us that we read. Memory is not nice. There are manager parts. Manager parts are those parts of us that help us get on with our day-to-day lives, right? So the part, and we wake up at 7 in the morning every day, go for a run, get to work on time, do our regular activities. So that's our manager part. And there are these firefighter parts that emerge every time the exile tends to come up, right? So let's say you've had that incident about public speaking. One day your boss suddenly calls you up for a presentation. That long lost exiled part of that child who was embarrassed in front of the public comes up and it's panicking, right? Because the exile is coming up, parallelly there's a firefighter that comes up because that wants to fight and say, let's not get the exile to come up, right? Because you don't want those firefighter might react in multiple. You fall sick just in front of the presentation, therefore you avoid that situation. That's one way the firefighter reacts. The other way would be the firefighter will force you to think up of excuses about why you can't make that presentation in front of your boss. So there are multiple ways in which does it. The role of the firefighter primarily is to keep the exiled quiet, to not let the exiled part come up. And the manager part otherwise manages things on a day-to-day routine basis. So the whole point of the firefighter or the manager is that they are all of them are trying to protect the self. The IFS theory says that the core of ourselves, in the midst of all of these parts, is the self. And our self is the seat of our consciousness. The self is that part of us that knows why we exist, why are we here, what's the purpose of our life. The other parts are all memories that get picked up along the way, and in the process we have emotional attachments and reactions that come up. So some parts are exile, some parts are managing the exile, and in the midst of it there is the self, which sometimes tends to get lost. And the whole purpose of using IFS is to get back in touch with the self and integrate all the other parts with the self, so that at the end of the day we live through our purpose, we live through the core of our being, and we don't live through hurt or through unpleasant memories. That's the whole point of using the IFS system. So the last time around we spoke about one very common part that most of us tend to have, that is the inner critic. So this inner critic is a part of us that, it's typically a firefighter. It tries to help us not to face certain situation through the mode of criticizing. So continuing with the previous example, the moment your boss says, okay, tomorrow you've got to make a presentation in front of the client, the inner critic is likely to come up and says, you're going to make a fool of yourself, you've never made a presentation in life. It's an inner dialogue that's happening. It's not directed towards anybody else, it's directed towards the self. So why does the inner critic do it? It's not, the purpose is not to self-sabotage. The inner critic is only trying to protect you from further embarrassment. So the point here is that any part, no matter how dysfunctional or how self-destructive it might seem, every part has a useful intention. Like, no part is trying to harm us, it's always trying to protect us. It's just that, yeah, of course, at a practical level, we may find the behavior that comes out very dysfunctional. So there are parts of us that might lead us into alcoholism, part of it that might lead us into drugs, some parts may make us feel suicidal. But the point is, all of them have a useful intention. They're trying to protect us from something. They're trying to protect us from some unpleasant emotion, some bad experience, and in the process, the behavior that results is not functional. So the point of the IFS therapy process is, how do we get these parts to operate in a functional way? The point is not to kill the parts in any way. The parts are essential to us and they're good for us. And it's important to acknowledge that they are only trying to safeguard the self. No matter how illogical it may seem, they are trying to safeguard the self. So today's focus is on the language of the parts. So if we have to engage with the parts, what is it that we are trying to say to them, and how do we speak the language of the parts? That's the focus of today. So it's a very simple, short talk that we have. So in order to engage with the parts, in order to be able to speak, to have that inner dialogue, we need to first figure out what is it that we need to listen to. Ultimately, when you're talking the language of the parts, there's something that you listen to and then you respond to it. So what is it that we are listening to? We're listening to primarily three sources. We're listening to our feelings that come up in whichever situation we are in. We're listening to the corresponding thoughts that might come up in that situation. And very importantly, we are listening to our body sensations.
It's a body movement.
Not even movement, but sensations. So, again, continuing with an example, if I'm suddenly asked, you've got to make a presentation tomorrow and I've had that embarrassing incident as a child, my feeling could be that of being panicky and saying, oh my god, I can't do this. Right? So I might feel stressed, I might feel sad, I might feel irritated about being given that opportunity. And so there are several feelings that might come up. Corresponding thoughts would also come up, and thoughts could range from saying, my boss is stupid, why does he have to ask me this, to saying, I am stupid, I don't know how to make a presentation, to saying that it's just so difficult, I don't know how to handle this, I've never done this before. So there are multiple thoughts that come up in association with the feelings. Parallelly, there will always be a body sensation. So the moment I receive that news that I have to make a presentation, my stomach is likely to go clenched. Typically that's what happens when you're nervous, right? The abdominal region tends to be clenched, muscles get contracted. If I'm extremely nervous, maybe my palms start sweating. I might try to avoid eye contact. with people, I want to go in my shell, so I start stooping and closing my body language and not stay open in the process. So body sensations could either be through muscular contractions, it could be through sweating, it could, so with some people you find temperature going up and down when you react to situations emotionally. The idea behind this is that a lot of recent research has proved that the moment there is an emotional shift in the brain, the body, different parts of the body start reacting. And the associated image that you've got there is about which parts of the body react to which emotion. So you've got anger, which is largely the upper part of the body, the head, the shoulders, the top part of the body that tends to react and go clenched and tight. And nervous. Fear is pretty much the whole torso. The abdominal muscles especially react a lot to fear. Disgust again is pretty much the same. Happiness, the whole body reacts, which is wonderful. Sadness largely is focused around the chest area. So the heart, the lungs react to a lot of sadness. So typically, if a person holds a lot of sadness for a long time, the physical repercussion is usually chest pain, lung diseases, heart diseases, something in that region. The element of surprise that we've got there is usually in the head, where there is an intellectual delight around pleasant surprise, not bad surprise, but pleasant surprise.
Is there any difference between for a body for a pleasant surprise and a...
Yeah, but because when it's a shock, then usually the reaction tends to be around fear. It's not a nice surprise. It's the body, the muscles clench, they don't open up. When it's a pleasant surprise, you open up to the process.
So, pleasant surprise is good for a body, I suppose.
Yeah, pleasant surprise is good. Shock is not obviously nice.
Serious face. Some serious face. Without which one?
Facial expressions can denote anything, and a lot of times facial expressions also mask a lot of things. Right? People tend to hide what's happening in terms of emotions. So it's not necessary that a facial expression will convey the emotion. Sometimes it might, but a lot of people learn to keep that poker face, so you may not always be able to guess. Unless you're very closely observing the eye movement, it's difficult to guess. But the point of this is, how do we start accessing the IFS language, the paths language, is listen to your own feelings, listen to your own thoughts, listen to your own body in terms of what's happening to you when a certain situation arises. And then the opportunity opens up to dialogue with that part of the body which is reacting to that situation. So, the language of the paths is really simple, but it requires a lot of practice, because the traditional language that we are all taught, and here when I say language, it doesn't necessarily mean English language, you can use it in whatever language you speak regularly. We are usually taught to speak of ourselves as one person, right? So if I say, for example, I'm happy, I'm talking of me as a whole. I as a complete entity am happy. But when the moment I'm happy, it doesn't mean that I have forgotten everything unpleasant that happened in the past. It's just that a predominant part of me that I'm accessing in that moment is happy. But we tend to extrapolate that into saying I completely am happy, whereas the reality is that a part of me is happy. The other part may still be sad, but at that moment I'm not accessing that sadness, it's just there. So, the language of the paths is specifically, you're encouraged to use it, especially when you're dealing with a dysfunctional part, a dysfunctional emotion. So let's say I have a fight with you. One option for me and the regular choice for me would be to say I'm angry with you.
Right?
Yeah. complete me is angry with complete you, right? And therefore the whole of me is ready to break up the relationship with the whole of you. The invitation here with the IFS model is to say, instead of saying I am angry with you, we say there's a part of me that's very upset, very angry with you. And if you can stretch it a little further, a part of me is very angry with a part of you. So what you're doing, the purpose behind a very specific way of using language is first to open the course for dialogue. I'm not saying whole of me that doesn't like whole of you. I'm just saying there's a part of me that's upset with a part of you. So there is still a possibility of a conversation with the other parts that are not angry or not upset. So there is a possibility of a conversation. Second, there is also resource opened up for conversation, because if I'm angry, then I don't even want to have a dialogue and sort things out. I'd rather break off that relationship or do something in a very snappy manner. Whereas here what I'm saying deliberately is that yes, there's a part of me that's angry, but there's also a part of me that is rational, there's also a part of me that wants to talk to you. There's also perhaps a part of me that still cares for you, is affectionate or loves you and therefore is angry with you. So the idea of saying it is, yes, I acknowledge part of me is angry with part of you, and that's important to convey. You should understand that there's some behavior that has triggered my anger. But at the same time, there's also another part of me that wants to have this dialogue and sort out the differences between us. So technique-wise, this is really simple. Paths language is very simple, and it can also be done internally. You can sometimes we get upset with ourselves for something that we've done wrong, a mistake we may have committed, and we say, "I'm stupid." So instead of doing that, the invitation internally would also be to say, I'm upset with a part of me that committed this mistake. It doesn't mean the other parts of me are as stupid. The other parts of me may still be intelligent. There's just this active part which happened to commit a certain mistake. So the core purpose of using the language of the parts is stay resourceful at all times. Otherwise, the tendency is to give away power to the emotion that takes over. And in that process, the self is nowhere in the picture. The anger makes the decision, or the sadness makes the decision. It's not us at the core that is making the decision. So, language, in terms of a template for the language, is very simple. All you're saying is, part of me feels this way about a part of you. But that's the template. It takes a little practice because we're not used to speaking like this. We always say, I am feeling this with you. So we don't really talk in terms of parts. And the habit that needs to get created is to recognize and talk in terms of parts. So why do we do this? We do this mainly for the purpose of what is called unblending in the IFS terminology. Unblending is where you're saying that there is an unresourceful emotion that has come up with one part. So whether it's anger or sadness, irritation, fear, nervousness, whatever is it that has come up for one part. Unblending would mean that you're saying that, okay, in this moment, this part holds anger or it holds sadness or whatever emotion it holds. It doesn't mean that that part has to hold the anger forever. You can unblend, which means you can unhook the anger from that part and release that part. Let it be at ease. It doesn't have to store the anger forever. So what happens when you say a part of me is feeling this way is to say, okay, now in this moment I'm feeling that a part of me is feeling this way. How do I know a part of me is feeling this way? Is because I can feel that contraction in my stomach, or I can feel my hands clenched, I can feel temperature rising in my head, whatever is it that I can feel apart from thoughts and emotions. But in the process there is a clarity given internally that it's possible to unhook from the emotion. You don't have to stick to the emotion and store it in the body. It's just a temporary emotion. It can get immediately released if I so choose to. So point 1 is unblending. What happens as a result is point 2, that the moment I say only a part of me is angry or upset or guilty or jealous, the other parts of me that aren't feeling that emotion are released as resources, and they can actually help us tackle the resources. So while one part of me is angry with you, the others are not angry with you. The others are just observing the situation. So the other parts of me can have a conversation with you about saying, okay, why did you have this behavior, or why did you say this thing which triggered my anger? And there can still be a rational conversation. And the important piece is we want to have a rational conversation, not an emotional conversation. Because in the emotional conversation, we give the power away to the emotion makes the decision, and the chances are very high that we might come back to regret the loss of that relationship or the loss of trust that can eventually happen. So here, we're not letting that happen, we're releasing resources that can actually have dialogues. And in the process of the dialogue, it's possible that the emotion gets purged out, the emotion gets released out of the system, and therefore it's not stored. And of course, it's important that unpleasant emotions specifically do not get stored in the body, because they always have psychosomatic consequences eventually. So it does, if there's a lot of storage of unpleasant emotion, diseases certainly occur at some point in time. So, yes.
Instead of I, means we often, as you said, we lot of emphasis on I. Like, so if we try to, it's instead of when not necessary, we can state our feelings without I. So will it be effective, or?
Yes, that is the invitation here, that instead of saying I as in the whole of me, you say there's a part of me that is feeling this emotion. So it's not the whole of me, and which is a reality for most of us, that in this moment, for example, if you say or do something and I get irritated with you for whatever reason, it doesn't mean that that emotion exists for me for the rest of the world. There's only in this moment, there's one part of me that's irritated or upset or angry or whatever. It doesn't mean the moment I walk out of the room, I'm going to be angry with everybody. That's not my reality. But in saying that I am angry, I'm owning up the entire emotion and transferring that to every part of me and making the whole of me unresourceful. So instead, the idea is to say, okay, the emotion emerged in an isolated part, let it stay there for a while in that isolated part, let the other parts deal with the situation, and in the process release the emotion instead of assimilating the emotion completely.
And also means at times we state to other person or we blame. So, and part of us, the whole person may not be as you we know. So sometimes we say ki I like particular quality we like about the person, we say,
Yes.
and then state the quality we not like. And then, so that is also effective way. Like you like a particular quality of the person, and you state I like the way you handle a situation also, and particular you don't like.
Yes.
Later on you state but when you behave like this, I don't like.
Yeah. You can. So that's another way of using the parts language. It's what I might call the street language of the parts. That yeah, you're saying that if I have to say something to you, I say that, listen, I really admire this part about you. There is this part of you that I would like to see changed, or you do it differently.
Yeah.
So in the process, I'm not rejecting you as a whole. I'm not rejecting you as a person. But just saying that there's one part which I would like to see better.
Because the other person or self also at times get close.
Yes.
That it's not open to listen or change.
Yeah, because and that reaction to feedback, which happens in the corporate life, it happens in our personal lives, it happens with children. When the moment parents say I have something to say to you, the tendency with children is, oh my god, I'm going to get scolded. Because the tendency is to label the whole and say you as a child are stupid. And it's not the whole of the child that is stupid, it's just one simple thing that he or she may have done that we don't appreciate. So it really helps to isolate that part and address only that part and not the whole thing. Because why put a person through rejection when you're not really rejecting the whole person, you're just rejecting one small act or one small behavior. So yes, the feedback mechanism is a very common usage of the paths.
Major portion is a phase, I think about it. The expression of the other person, we can find out from the face of a man.
Yes, so here we're not necessarily talking in terms of physical parts, but internal parts.
The other parts are there,
Yes.
but major part we can.
Yeah, the expression can be seen through the face, if that's what you mean. Yes. So here when we say internal family systems, we're talking of the fact that there is an inner child, there is an inner parent, inner critic, inner brother, sister, and that's why it's called an internal family. So like we have external families, we have those same archetypes within us. So there's an inner mother and an inner father and an inner child. And they're constantly dialoguing to create what we think is one personality. So the idea is to make that internal family have healthy relationships with each other. So it doesn't mean that you can't critique yourself. It only means that critiquing doesn't mean rejecting the whole of yourself, but just telling yourself that okay, that part of me could have done that task better. But that's the intention. So to stay in a resourceful state all the time. So that's primarily the purpose of using the whole parts language. And the good thing with using parts language is if you're speaking in the parts language to somebody else, it doesn't mean the other person has to know anything about IFS or even remotely know about psychotherapy or anything. Typically when we use parts language even with an absolute stranger, it works because the nature of the language is such that the tone calms down. The moment I say a part of me is upset with part of you, this tone is not the same as saying I'm upset with you. There's a lot more charge to the emotion when I say I am instead of saying a part of me. So even if the other person doesn't understand what the part of you is, the tone conveys the message that you want to convey, and it's very likely therefore that the person will open up to that dialogue and will also be open to the feedback that you have to share in the process. Another thing that you can do with the parts language is you can initiate the parts language even if you're a receiver in the conversation. So if somebody were to come to you and say that that person is upset with you, you can initiate the parts language in terms of paraphrasing and saying, so I understand that there's a part of you that is upset with something I have done. So in that process you're isolating and you're saying, okay, there is one part of you that reacted to something I did. So it's not you versus me, but something in you and something in me. So then let's initiate that conversation and have that dialogue. So what you're doing in the process is you're isolating a micro piece on both sides and then let that micro piece have that conversation while the macro piece is available as resources, is available in terms of logic and rationale, and it's not getting caught up in the emotion of the micro parts. So the good news is anybody can initiate it. It's not that only you as a practitioner of IFS can initiate it. You as a receiver in a conversation can also initiate the language of the parts without the other person having any knowledge or clue about what is happening. The conversation is just as effective. Right, so that's that. The language is simple. All we are saying is part of me feels this with part of you. That's the basic template. The challenge is practice. It's important to move away from the conditioned language of speaking in whole to speaking in parts. So that's that for me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.